Hebrews 6:12. He says, "Be not slothful, but followers of them who through faith and patience inherit the promises." Okay, so he's told them you're going to need to be faithful and you're going to have to be patient. Going through the tribulation, I'd say so, yeah. He says, but hold on, because that formula has proved that the people who do that inherit the promises. In a minute, he's going to refer us to Abraham. I want you to notice something, though. That verse, the last word of the verse says promises. Now he's going to go through and give you an example. And as he gives the example, he changes it. The example is not about promises, plural. The example will be about a promise, singular. So that's a difference. So notice the plural and the singulars. Anytime you come across those, they're referring to something or things specifically. He says, not slothful. Look at it in chapter 5, verse 11. Here's why they can't be lazy. He says, chapter 5, verse 11, of whom we have many things to say and hard to be understood or to be uttered, seeing ye are dull of hearing. That is, one of the reasons you're going to have to toil and slug and work your way through is this. Some things that you have to learn are hard to understand. They're tedious, they're boring. Just like any time that you want to go read your Bible, and there are a million other things that are more convenient to do. It's going to be the same way. Verse 12. For when for the time you ought to be teachers. People don't like to teach. I would rather teach than preach. I'm odd though. But people don't like to teach anymore. You ask somebody to teach a class, and they don't want to teach a class by and large. That means they've got to do it on a consistent basis. That means they got to go do some homework. That means they got to be ready for questions they're not ready for. I mean, teaching, it's scary. He says, you ought to be teachers. You have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become as such as have need of milk and not strong meat. So he's saying, go on to meat. Don't be slothful. Don't be a sissy. Dive in. Proverbs 12. Proverbs 12, verse 24. He says, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule. Now that's one reason to not be slothful. You find that just in daily life. That's just a principle. The one who stays diligent, stays on top of it, stays detailed, that type of person ends up being the ruler, the one in control. But the slothful shall be under tribute. Ooh, bad news. Look at it in chapter 15, Proverbs 15, verse 19. He says, the way of the slothful man is as an hedge of thorns. We talked about thorns earlier. In Hebrews, the thorn is to be burned, hedge of thorns. But the way of the righteous is made plain, and they'll need it to be made plain in the tribulation. He says in our passage in Hebrews 6, verse 12, that you be not slothful, but followers of them, so forth, so on. So they're supposed to be looking to some examples that they can follow. This is always a principle in the Bible, is find somebody who's doing right and line up with them. But it's always given in such a way that you don't do everything they do because they're human. Humans are going to be stupid and make a mistake here and there. So he says, followers. All of the commentators changed this. Of course, Ruckman didn't even mention it. He skips the hard parts. But all the commentators say imitators. I don't want to be an imitator. An imitator means a carbon copy without a brain. A parrot is an imitator, but a parrot doesn't really have a conversation, doesn't have a brain. God wants you to use your brain. That's why he gave it to us. He says, but followers. Look at it in 1 Corinthians 11. Here's how Paul puts it. Notice when Paul says to be a follower, he uses it a little differently. He says, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. So he's letting them know right up front, you're not following me because I'm the end all be all. You're following me because I'm following somebody else. And as I'm following somebody else, you can follow me. But if I'm not following them, don't you follow. There's no need to fall in the ditch if the guy in front of you did. That'd be a good time to swerve. Now, in the tribulation, they're going to have some people to follow. The two witnesses will be here, Moses and Elijah. The 144,000 will be here. There will be plenty to follow. It's not going to be easy. That's why God does some supernatural things to make it easier, but I don't think it's going to be easy. Now, he said in our verse, Hebrews 6:12, the last phrase, followers of them who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Now, the reason they're doing this is to inherit something. They're inheriting promises. Now, the way they do it is by work, patience, enduring to the end, things that are contrary to the flesh. Yeah, Romans 2, verse 7. We think of Romans as being the book of our doctrine, and it is to a degree, but Romans warms you up to it. Romans comes in, he talks about the heathen, he talks about the difference between Jew and Gentile. Notice this verse, Romans 2:7. To them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory, honor, immortality, eternal life. That's not our plan of salvation. Here he's talking about the heathen, and he's talking about them obeying their conscience. And the difference between a Jew and a heathen, if one of them's obeying the law that God's written in their heart, they're the same as if God had put them in the nation of Israel and given them his commandments, because they've obeyed what he's revealed to them. It's the same system in the tribulation. They have to obey the commandments. They have to obey the conscience. I think it's going to go right back to this same system as early on in Acts and early on in Romans. Look at in Revelation 14. He says, through patience inherit promises. So let's find out what he thinks patience is. His idea of patience is a little different than mine. Just like when I go to the doctor and they have the patient's waiting room. Well, I'm not patient. I might stand there for a minute. I don't wait long. But God's got a different idea of patience. Think about it. He's already at the end of everything, looking back through it. And he's telling us to be patient. Well, we don't see all the things he's seeing. We're not very patient. Hebrews 14, verse 12. Or not Hebrews, Revelation. Revelation 14:12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. You know what it takes to obey what you're supposed to do? It takes patience. It takes calming yourself down, telling the flesh to sit down and shut up. Not Now, one way you can is this, by realizing the pleasure that the flesh seeks never ends in pleasure. Now, that's a good way to view it. However, usually, just in your daily life, the things that the flesh wants to do, not necessarily, I'm not talking about real wicked things, but the things the flesh wants to do versus what God wants to do, it's going to feel like you have to calm yourself down to do it. This flesh wants to run ahead, not wait. That's the Psalms, all the way through the Psalms. The message is this: wait on the Lord, be patient. So that's the message they're going to be preached. Look at it in Hebrews 6, verse 12. That was our text, and now he's going to give us the example. For when God made promise, now how many is that? That's singular. Now I know you could say it's more than one, meaning promise in a general sense, but I think it's singular. When God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. So that's singular. He obtained a singular promise, according to that so far. Now that's his example of being patient, is all that time it took Abraham to come up with a child. Not till he's 100 years old. I'd say that's some patience. He said that's what it's going to feel like going through 7 years of tribulation. It's going to feel like the 100 that Abraham's waiting for a seed. It's going to feel like waiting on a woman to get ready. I mean, Genesis 15. Let's find some of these promises. Genesis 15, verse 18. Genesis 15, 18. In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. And the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. All them ites. So he's told them something here. He told them, I'm going to give you not only a seed, but the land. And I'm going to do more than give you just the land, but I'm going to give you the people of the land. You're going to be the conqueror. Now, it's important to know that's part of the promise because that's what the Jews looking for. And we'll find it in the Bible. I'll try not to get ahead of myself. Genesis 22, verse 15. Genesis 22, verse 15. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time. Good. I like that. I got 2 ears and I need both of them filled. Verse 16. And said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thee. Okay, similar to what we've already seen before. He's just saying, I'm going to tell you the same thing again. Here's what he's, let's word, multiplying, I'll multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand upon the seashore. Now, this is an important promise because you see this come all the way through the Bible. And thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemies. Same thing we saw in 15, where he named who the enemies were. So, verse 18, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast cut my page off. What's the rest of that? Because thou hast obeyed the voice or something? Obeyed my voice. Mhm. Psalm 105, verse 8. In Hebrews, he called it promise, called it promises. Here it's called a covenant. Psalm 105, verse 8. He hath remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which covenant he made with Abraham, and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed the same unto Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant. Said a lot of things in there. He's remembered this for how long? He says there to 1,000 generations. Now, why did he say 1,000 generations? I'll tell you what most people are going to tell you when he says that. He just means a really long time. Doesn't he know how to say really long time? He meant 1,000 generations. The reason he's saying it like this is because he's talking about the generations of something that's not human. He's talking about the generations of the ground that he's promised them. The ground has a generation. The ground's generation is 7 years. Remember, that's why he told them every 7 years you quit farming. Let it go fallow. And they quit doing that. And because they quit doing it, he kicked them out of Israel. He said, let my land regenerate. If you'll let it go fallow after the 7th year, then it rebuilds itself. The nutrients come back, and then they can come back and farm again. So that's, if you multiply that, 7 years times 1,000 generations would be how long the earth is here? 7,000 years. Look at it in Luke 1. Luke 1, verse 71. Luke 1:71. That's a long chapter. Well, it's all good. Let's start back at 68. He says, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel. Okay, so he's talking about Israel, not the world, not all people, Israel. For he hath visited and redeemed his people. Those are a different set of people than the rest of the world. Now, you weren't his people before you got saved, so you couldn't have been redeemed. What's redeemed mean? It means bought back. You weren't bought to begin with. You had to be bought the first time. So somebody's already been purchased. When did Israel get purchased? At the Red Sea. That's where he bought back all of their bondage and debt they owed to Israel, or not to Israel, to Egypt. He became the new debtor. Now they owed him because he delivered them. Verse, where are we now? Verse 69. And hath raised up an horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. That line, the line of David, that's where the king should come from. Verse 70. As he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began, that we should be saved from our enemies and from a hand of all that hate us. This is a promise that they've been promised. His people, Israel. We've seen it being promised to Abraham. Verse 72. To perform the mercy promised to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, that promise, the oath which he sware to our father Abraham. That's what Abraham was promised, is I'll give you the land and I'll free you from dominion of any other foreign force. Verse 74, that he would grant us that we, being delivered out of the hands of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all the days of our life. Okay, so that's what they're promised. That's what they're looking for. That's when he shows up. That's what they want to see. Look at it in Hebrews 6. Hebrews 6, verse 9. Now this verse makes a little more sense. But, beloved, we are persuaded better things of you and things that accompany salvation. Isn't that what he said in Luke? A horn of salvation? Yes. What kind of salvation? From all their enemies. That's why in Acts chapter 1, when Jesus is speaking to them after the resurrection, that's the one question they have for him. They don't often ask questions of Jesus, not smart ones. But this one they asked, they said, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Okay, that's what they were interested in. Why? Because that's part of the promise that had been promised them from the beginning, is what he said in Luke. And then he identifies it as being Abraham. There's a promised seed, and the promise is said to be as the sand of the seashore and the stars of heaven. Now, what you don't realize unless you start paying attention when you're reading the Bible is that that promise had been fulfilled many times over. Look at it in Exodus 32. Exodus 32, verse 13. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self, and saidst unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. This promise is always capped off with a forever. Once they get it, it'll be forever. They've not been given it by God yet. They've been given it by, in Judges, he calls them saviors, that is, deliverers that have come in and delivered them. But the Messiah hadn't come back and given them the land yet. And once he does, it'll be forever. Look at Deuteronomy 1. Deuteronomy 1, verse 10. Now, what he's talking about in Hebrews cannot be the multiplying like the stars of heaven and the sand of the sea. And here's why. That promise has long ago been fulfilled. Deuteronomy 1:10. The Lord your God hath multiplied you, and behold, ye are this day as the stars of heaven for multitude. That one's already been done. So that's not the promise he's referring to in Hebrews. He's referring to another promise. What other promise could it be? The very promise they were worried about in Acts chapter 1. When are we going to get out from under the bondage of all these other heathen nations? That's millennium. Look at it in Deuteronomy 10, verse 22. Deuteronomy 10, verse 22. It says, Thy fathers went down into Egypt, 70 persons, and now the Lord thy God hath made thee as the stars of heaven for multitude. He keeps reminding them, I promised this, and I've done it. But there's other promises in there. Remember, we saw it wasn't just the multiplication of the seed, it was the freedom from all other bondage. That's one thing you know about the nation of Israel is it's always been in bondage. The second they get their hand free, everybody wants to jump on top of them. Look at them right now. Everybody's against them. And it's only going to get worse. In verse 15, Hebrews, where are we? Hebrews 6, 15. In verse 15, he obtained the singular promise. Verse 12, inherit the promises, plural. So there's more than one promise. Abraham was promised more than one thing. We've seen one promise was fulfilled, and there's still promises yet to be fulfilled. Yeah, Hebrews 11:13. Hebrews 11:13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Yes. My page is not quite updating. Okay, verse 39. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promises. Promise singular. So they were promised something. They did what they're supposed to, and they didn't receive it. But he said in chapter 6, Abraham received it. Well, he received part of it. He didn't receive all the promises. That's what the book of Hebrews is about, is you've got something more to push for. There's a big promise coming, and if you hang on, you can get in on it. And that's them getting through the tribulation. Verse 40. God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. What in the world does that mean? Think about it. If Israel is supposed to inherit the land forever, the generation who actually inherits it forever is needed for the completion of the nation's line to have said, we inherited it forever. So that's the generation waiting on it. And that's pointing out toward the end of the tribulation. Hebrews 6, verse 16. Hebrews 6, verse 16. He says, For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of strife. Okay, all strife, end of all strife. Okay, so the thing is this. I promise I'll do this for you, and you go down to buy something, and they say, well, give me some proof you're going to actually pay for it. If you don't pay for it all right now, how are you going to convince me that it's worth me giving up my possession so that I can count on you coming in and paying for this? So you give them some layaway money. You give them a down payment. And here it's called a vow, a oath, you swear, you promise based on something bigger than you. So you say, well, I'll get a cosigner. Well, if your cosigner's God, there's not a problem. And that's what he's saying here. The promise is made and signed, is made by God and signed off by God. You can't get any higher than that. God says, I was looking around thinking, what could I use as collateral so these people would believe me? And I thought the best I could find was myself. So his covenant and his oath. Look at it in Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 33. Matthew 5:33. Again, you have heard, it hath been said of them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself. That is, promise you're going to do something. But shalt perform unto the Lord thine oath. That is, you determine between you and God what's right and wrong, and then do that because it's of God. Verse 34. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. That is, don't be using my product to claim this is your people swear. What's the phrase they use? I swear on my grandmother's grave, or I swear on. Okay, that means nothing. Uh, what am I going to go? If you didn't do it, I'm going to go dig up your grandmother's grave. What good's that going to do me? I don't want her sitting in the living room. So they try to appeal to something that people think is reverenced. Okay, here he's saying God's throne. Don't swear by heaven. Don't swear by earth. It's his footstool. Don't swear by anything that you don't own. It's all God's. Leave me out of it. That's what he's saying. God says, the best thing I can swear by is me because I own it all. That's a good promise right there. Matthew 23. Matthew 23, verse 16. He says, woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Now you know where they started howling when you talked about their pocketbook. You can swear by the religion as a whole, the temple, but don't dare start talking about our money. Don't hold us account. Don't co-sign the money of the temple, because you're not going to put us in your debt. That's what he's saying. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater the gold of the temple, or that sanctifieth the gold, or that, or the temple that sanctifieth the gold. And whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing, but whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon the altar, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? He's saying there's always something bigger than the most man can put his hands on. That's something supernatural. That's why God made the promise and says, wait a minute, I'm going to verify the promise by something even greater myself. So he said that's going to settle it. That'll settle the argument right there. The only way it settles it is if you believe God is who God is. If you don't understand there's a God, then that promise means zero. That's why the final stage in the tribulation is this: they have to preach a different gospel. An angel from heaven preaches it. It's called the everlasting gospel. You know what the first phrase of it is? Fear God. People don't believe in God anymore. So he's got to preach God. Go back to the beginning. Preach God. Genesis 31. Genesis 31, verse 44. Here's how they used to do it in the Bible in the old days. They were going to make a promise to do something, or a vow between two people. Genesis 31, verse 44. Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. So they just set up a stone right there. Now, of course, it must be a massive stone, but something they could always go back to and say, remember that right there? Now, I don't know if they wrote anything on it or not. It doesn't tell us. But that stone was supposed to picture something that they would both understand. So if somebody broke it, they could take them back there with some witnesses and say, from that spot right there, we promised this would happen and that would happen. Look at it down in verse 47. And Laban called it that thing right there, Jegar-Sheth-Shel-Delutha. But Jacob called it Gilead. I would too. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called what is it? Gilead. And Mitzvah. For he said, the Lord watch between me and thee, and we are when we are absent the one from the other. The inference is this: God says, Jesus says, if these people don't cry out, the stones will cry out. There's more to this than just a show. The stones are recording something, and that's what they're doing all through there. They're picking up stones and they're making a recording. They're making a promise before it. In Joshua 24. Joshua 24, verse 27. Here it's a little clearer. And Joshua said unto all the people, Behold, this stone shall be a witness unto us, for it hath heard all the words of the Lord which he spake unto us. It shall be therefore a witness unto you, lest ye deny your God. That is, the creator of this universe has everything bugged. He can play it back anytime he wants to, and probably at the judgment he will. Everything has ears. He says in Ecclesiastes, a bird of the air will tell the matter if you're whispering something in the bedroom at night. So be careful. Look at it in Hebrews 6, verse 17. Wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath. Okay, he made a promise because he wanted to show them how serious he was about it. And here it's promise singular again. Notice the object of this promise is the heirs, someone who inherits. Look at the Hall of Fame, which is the chapter 11, the Hall of Faith, Hebrews 11. This is, I know that people think they try to force this into the church age. This is not church age. This is not the same kind of faith you and I have. Hebrews 11, look at verse 7. By faith, Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. How did he get righteousness that's through faith? He did a work, and the work itself saved him. He worked and built a boat, and the boat was his salvation. That ain't no plan of salvation I got. I refuse to do any work. I trust on the work somebody else did. Very different, completely different, different age. Look at it in verse 9. Who's 9 about? I think is this Abraham? By faith he sojourned in the land of promise. Here's that promise again. As in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise, singular. There's that land. Okay, how does it happen here? Here it happens by the work of the feet. He's got to keep moving. He's constantly on the move, constantly having to build a new shelter, deal with all the arguments of all the workers. Could you imagine that? What a thing. Look at it in Romans chapter 8. The heir there is, of course, Israel, the descendants of Israel, the nation that he had promised that land to. We got a little different system. Romans 8, verse 17. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. Now that tells you our inheritance. Our inheritance is not the ground. Our inheritance is to rule and reign. If you suffer with me, you also reign with me. Same thing he's saying here. You're a joint heir with Christ. How are you a joint heir? Because you're joined as one body. You're the bride of Christ. What he inherits, you inherit. Pretty good deal, isn't it? And he says, if you're a good wife, not one of my bad ones, then you'll get to inherit with me. Look at it in Galatians 3. Galatians 3, verse 29. He says, and if you be Christ's, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So there's some part of Abraham's promise that you get to inherit as well. Well, I guess so. If you're ruling over all of the land, then you've got the land. Look at it in James 2, verse 5. He says, hearken, my beloved brethren, hath not God chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom which he hath promised to them that love him? Now, you can make a spiritual application there and say that that's to a Christian who loves God and is willing to go through some things, and we can line it up with Paul saying that if you suffer for Christ, then you also reign with Him. But here he's talking to, according to James, the scattered tribes that are the tribes that are scattered. How's he say it, James 1? To the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Okay, yeah, those 12 tribes are not me, although they're trying to make everybody tribal now. But he's saying right here, those 12 tribes that are scattered have a kingdom that they're supposed to be heirs of. Look at it, First Peter 3. 1 Peter 3, verse 7. There's an interesting thing here. I don't make a big doctrine out of it, but I think it is. 1 Peter 3, verse 7. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Now he's saying there, you're a team. A husband and a wife are a team. Now they do something together. What do they do together? They inherit together. I think that's a good deal. So you get to heaven. The inheritance is a teamwork. How did the team complete the relay? Not just one person. I think that's a good deal. But he also says this life, grace of life. So down here, the grace of life, getting through this life, you have a partner, you have a helper. Remember, the reason he's got to do it this way is because he's already laid out the principle. What is marriage? Marriage is a picture of Christ and the church, the bride and the bridegroom. And we're joint heirs with Christ. Therefore, the marriage must also be a joint heir, a double inheritance as one.